Sarah Parker had always believed in love, in commitment, in the idea that when you married someone, you built a life together, through good times and bad. That was the promise she had made to Mark 7 years ago, standing in front of friends and family, believing with all her heart that they were equals, partners in the journey ahead. But somewhere along the way, the partnership had disappeared. The love had faded. And now, at 38, Sarah found herself trapped in a marriage where she felt more like a resource than a wife. It hadn't always been this way. In the beginning, Mark had been charming, attentive, funny, the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel special. But as time passed, his true nature surfaced. He wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. He never raised a hand to her, never shouted insults across the room. Instead, it was the slow, steady erosion of respect, the way he dismissed her thoughts, the way he made her feel small without ever having to say the words. Sarah worked as a senior accountant for a large firm, earning a comfortable salary, and at first, she had been proud to contribute to their shared life. But over the years, the finances became one-sided. Mark, who had once held a steady job in sales, had grown complacent. He hopped from one business venture to the next, none of them panning out, each failure leaving Sarah to pick up the slack. She covered the mortgage, the bills, the groceries, while Mark reassured her that his big break was just around the corner. His family wasn't any better. His mother, Margaret, was the kind of woman who spoke in sugary tones but carried an air of entitlement that was impossible to ignore. From the very beginning, she had made it clear that she didn't think Sarah was good enough for her son. Mark deserves a wife who will support him in every way, she had once told Sarah over Thanksgiving dinner, as if being the sole provider of their household wasn't enough. Then there was his younger sister, Lisa, who had a knack for turning every conversation into a plea for money. At 26, she was still living at home, bouncing between jobs and expecting Mark, and by extension, Sarah, to fund her lifestyle. "It's just a loan," she would say, flashing an easy smile. But the money was never repaid, and over time, the requests turned into demands. Sarah had spent years trying to be the good wife. She kept the peace, smiled through family gatherings, and wrote the checks that kept everyone comfortable. But the more she gave, the more they took, and Mark never once stood up for her. Instead, he encouraged it. "Family helps family," he would say, as if that explained why his mother had access to their joint bank account or why his sister expected Sarah to foot the bill for her new car. For years, Sarah convinced herself that this was normal, that she was just doing what any devoted wife would do. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't part of a marriage. She was part of an arrangement, one where her role was to give and theirs was to take. The realization hit her hardest one Saturday afternoon. Mark had just walked into the living room, phone in hand, an expectant look on his face. "Mom needs some help," he said casually, as if he were asking her to pick up milk from the store. Sarah sighed, already knowing what was coming. "How much this time?" "She just needs a little to cover some medical bills," he said. "Lisa too. Her car's been acting up." Sarah set down the paperwork she had been reviewing. She had just paid the mortgage. Their credit card bill was due in a few days. And now, on top of that, she was expected to hand over more money with no discussion, no consideration for how it affected her. "No," she said simply. Mark blinked, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not doing this anymore." His expression darkened, the easygoing facade slipping just enough to reveal his frustration. "Sarah, they need us." "No," she corrected. "They need me. You just go along with it." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might argue. But then he did something unexpected. He scoffed, shaking his head, and said, "You've been way too defiant lately. If you can't support my family, maybe we shouldn't be married." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Sarah felt her heart pound in her chest, not with fear, but with something else. Clarity. For the first time in years, she saw her marriage for what it was, a contract she had never agreed to, a role she had been forced into, a weight she had been carrying alone. And now, Mark had just handed her an escape. She met his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Maybe he thought he was issuing a threat. Maybe he expected her to back down. But all Sarah could think was, finally, I have a way out. And she was going to take it. Sarah had always believed that marriage was about partnership, about two people working together through life's ups and downs. But over the years, that belief had been chipped away, piece by piece, until all that remained was exhaustion and resentment. At first, when Mark quit his job to start his own business, Sarah had been supportive. She believed in him, in his dreams, and in the vision he painted for their future. She took on extra work, cutting back on personal expenses, stretching every dollar to keep their household running. But as the months passed, and then the years, his business remained nothing more than a vague promise, a fantasy he refused to let go of. Meanwhile, Sarah was paying for everything: rent, groceries, utilities, even his personal expenses. And Mark? He never seemed too concerned. He'd sit at his computer for hours, claiming to be networking or working on strategy, but Sarah saw no progress, no income, nothing but a growing mountain of debt. Yet, even the financial strain wasn't the worst part. The real issue was Mark's family. His mother and sister were relentless in their judgment of Sarah, treating her as though she were some outsider who had invaded their lives. Every visit to his mother's house was like stepping onto a battlefield. His mother would comment on her cooking, her appearance, even the way she spoke. A wife should know how to take care of her husband properly, she'd sneer, while his sister, Ashley, would roll her eyes and whisper something under her breath. Sarah endured it at first, biting her tongue, believing that if she was patient, they would grow to accept her. But they never did. If anything, their hostility only worsened, emboldened by Mark's silent approval. He never defended her, never stood up for her. Instead, he played the devoted son, making excuses for their behavior and insisting Sarah should try harder to get along. And worst of all, he kept taking their side. One evening, the breaking point finally came. Sarah had just come home from a grueling day at work, her body aching from exhaustion, when Mark approached her with a casual, almost dismissive request. "Hey, can you give Ashley $500? She needs it for a birthday gift for a friend." Sarah blinked, barely able to process what she had just heard. $500? For a birthday gift? What is she buying, a car? Mark sighed as if she were the unreasonable one. "Come on, Sarah, don't be so dramatic. Just give it to her. You make plenty." That was it. The final crack before everything shattered. She let out a sharp laugh, incredulous. "You think I should just hand over $500, money I worked for, while you contribute nothing? While Ashley, a grown woman, refuses to get a job?" Before Mark could reply, his mother, who had apparently been listening from the kitchen, chimed in. "A wife should support her husband's family. That's how marriage works." Ashley, sensing the tension, added with a smirk, "And since you're so cheap, can I have $300 instead? Just for something small." Sarah felt the heat rise in her face. They weren't even pretending anymore. They genuinely saw her as a walking ATM, as someone whose only purpose was to fund their needs without question. And Mark, he just stood there, silent, complicit. When he finally spoke, his words sealed his fate. "Thanks to me, you have a place to live. So the least you could do is share." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The sheer audacity of it. He really believed this, believed that he was the provider, that she owed him something, even though he hadn't contributed a cent in over a year. Later, in the car ride home, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why do you act like you're supporting this household when you do nothing? When you don't even pay the bills?" He shrugged. "I have my pride. I'm the man of this house." Sarah felt something inside her snap. "If you give them money once, they'll keep asking for more. We can't afford this, Mark. We're barely getting by, and you haven't done anything to fix it." His response was as dismissive as ever. "Making my mom happy isn't a bad thing." It was in that moment that Sarah knew. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't something they could work through. Mark wasn't going to change. His family wasn't going to change. And if she stayed, she would spend the rest of her life being used, drained, and disrespected. The final straw came days later when Mark, clearly annoyed at her recent defiance, made his most ridiculous statement yet. "A wife should obey her husband. If you don't, maybe we should just get a divorce." Sarah stared at him, stunned for only a second before something unexpected happened. Relief, a lightness in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt a way out. Mark leaned back, smug. "You don't want me to leave, do you?" he taunted. "I already signed my part of the papers. If you push me too far, I'll file them. Think carefully." He thought he was scaring her. He thought she would beg him to stay. But he had no idea that he had just given her exactly what she needed. Sarah turned away, a small smile creeping onto her lips. He had just handed her the key to her freedom, and she was going to take it. Sarah sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, the echoes of her latest fight with Mark still ringing in her ears. Her heart pounded, not just from the anger of their argument, but from the realization that she had reached her limit. She couldn't do this anymore, couldn't keep sacrificing her peace, her sanity, her future for a man who saw her as nothing more than a provider, an ATM, a doormat. For years, she had convinced herself that if she just held on a little longer, things would get better. That if she worked a little harder, saved a little more, Mark would step up. But he never did. And after tonight, it was clear he never would. The way he had smirked when he threw out the word divorce, as if he was testing her, daring her to fight for him, had set something off inside her. He thought she would beg, that she would cry, that she would do anything to keep him. But he was wrong. So very wrong. She took a deep breath, steadied her trembling hands, and reached for her laptop. It was time to take control of her own life. The next few weeks became a game of strategy. Sarah knew she couldn't just walk out overnight. Mark would see it coming, and he would make it as difficult as possible. No, she needed to be smart, calculated, methodical. She started by quietly transferring small amounts of money from their shared account into a personal savings account. Nothing big enough to raise suspicion, just enough to build her escape fund. At the same time, she cut back on unnecessary expenses, choosing to cook at home instead of ordering takeout, skipping out on shopping sprees, and pocketing every extra dollar she could. But money was only part of the plan. Sarah needed an exit strategy. She reached out to a realtor, pretending she was casually looking for investment properties. But in reality, she was hunting for a home, her home. She spent her lunch breaks scrolling through listings, envisioning what her life would look like in a space that belonged to her alone, free from the toxicity that had consumed her for too long. When she finally found it, a modest yet beautiful house on the outskirts of town, with a front porch perfect for morning coffee and a backyard big enough to start the garden she had always dreamed of, she felt something she hadn't in years: hope. Without hesitation, she made an offer. And within weeks, it was hers. All that was left was the move. And she had to be careful. She started packing in secret, one box at a time, labeling them as donations or seasonal storage. She took carloads to her parents' house, under the guise of decluttering. Every time she left the apartment with another piece of her life, she felt lighter, freer, as if she was slowly shedding the weight of the years she had wasted. Mark barely noticed. He was too wrapped up in himself, too comfortable in his role as the king of their crumbling castle. He still demanded money, still expected her to cater to his family's every whim, still acted as though he had everything under control. He never suspected that Sarah had already mentally checked out, that she was no longer the desperate wife trying to fix a broken man. She was a woman on a mission, and nothing would stop her now. The final piece fell into place when Mark announced he'd be spending the weekend with his mother and sister. It was almost too perfect. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, Sarah sprang into action. She had arranged for movers to come that very afternoon. Within hours, the apartment was stripped bare of anything that belonged to her. Furniture, clothes, documents, everything she wanted, she took. Everything else, she left behind. She even left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, a silent farewell to a life she no longer wanted. By the time the sun set, she stood in the doorway, looking at the empty shell of what had once been her home. But it had never really been a home, had it? It had been a prison, and tonight, she was finally free. With one last deep breath, she turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked away, never looking back. The moment Sarah vanished from his life, Mark's world began to crumble. At first, he was in denial. He stormed through the empty apartment, convinced this was some elaborate joke. But the joke never ended. Every room was hollow, stripped of warmth, of presence, of Sarah. He checked the closet, hoping to find her clothes still hanging there. But all that remained were his own disheveled shirts, wrinkled and untouched. He rushed to the bathroom, yanking open drawers, expecting to see her makeup, her perfume, the remnants of her existence. But there was nothing. Just a cold, sterile emptiness staring back at him. Panic set in. Mark grabbed his phone and dialed Sarah's number, his fingers trembling. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Each unanswered call chipped away at his arrogance, replacing it with a gnawing fear. He sent a barrage of texts. "Where are you? This isn't funny. Sarah? Come home. Now." No response. Mark staggered into the living room, his mind racing. How had she managed to do this under his nose? She had always been predictable, docile. At least, that's what he had believed. Now, the realization hit him like a freight train. Sarah had been planning this for months. He grabbed his car keys and bolted out the door, speeding toward her office. Surely, she'd be there, sitting at her desk like always, waiting for him to show up and demand an explanation. But when he arrived, the receptionist gave him a wary look. "She quit last week," she said. Mark blinked. "What?" She gave her notice and left. "Didn't tell you." The receptionist's eyes held something he couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe. It made his stomach turn. He backed away, his pulse hammering against his skull. If Sarah had quit her job, that meant she wasn't coming back. This wasn't a fight. This was final. He drove aimlessly, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind spiraled through every memory, every argument, every moment he had dismissed her anger, ignored her pleas, laughed off her frustrations. He had always assumed she needed him more than he needed her. Now, he realized how wrong he had been. Desperation took hold. He needed to find her, to stop this before it was too late. He drove to her parents' house next, speeding through red lights, convinced they would have answers. When he arrived, her father opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Where is she?" Mark demanded. Her father's face remained impassive. "She doesn't want to see you, Mark." "That's not up to her." The words shot out before he could stop them. Her father's jaw tightened. "Actually, it is." Mark's breath came in sharp gasps. "She's my wife." "No," her father said calmly. "She was your wife. The divorce papers have been filed." Mark's world tilted. The porch felt like it was collapsing beneath his feet. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Sarah had filed for divorce. She had done it. She had truly left him. Rage flared in his chest, a blind, seething fury. He turned, storming off the porch, fists clenched. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He refused to let her win. He refused to let her think she could just walk away from him like he was nothing. That night, Mark sat in the darkened apartment, surrounded by the emptiness she left behind. He barely recognized himself in the reflection of the TV screen. His pride, his control, everything had been shattered. He picked up his phone, scrolled through their old messages, and typed out a final text. "You can't hide from me, Sarah. This isn't over." Sarah sat on the porch of her new home, the sun casting a warm golden hue over the neatly manicured lawn. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long was finally gone, replaced by a sense of lightness, of freedom. She had done it. She had broken free from the suffocating grasp of Mark and his toxic family. Now, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her parents had moved in a few weeks ago, and every day since had been filled with warmth and love. Their presence turned the house into a home, something her marriage had never managed to accomplish. She could hear her father in the kitchen, humming an old tune while her mother prepped dinner. The aroma of roasted chicken and herbs wafted through the open window, filling the air with a comforting familiarity. Sarah leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea, her thoughts drifting to the chaos she had left behind. She had no regrets. Mark had tried to hold on, to claw his way back into her life, but the restraining order kept him at bay. She had heard rumors that he had been forced to move back in with his mother after his business failed. The same family who had once treated her like an outsider had now turned on him, blaming him for their financial ruin. It was poetic justice, really. She had come a long way from the scared woman who once walked on eggshells around her husband, terrified of setting him off. Now, she was thriving. She had started a new job at a publishing firm, a career she had always dreamed of but never pursued because Mark had convinced her it was impractical. The work was fulfilling, the environment supportive, and for the first time, she felt valued. One evening, as she sat in the backyard, watching the sunset with her parents, her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, honey," she said softly. "You fought for yourself, and you won." Sarah smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I finally feel like myself again. Like I can breathe." Her father chuckled. "And that's how it should be. No one should have to live in fear just to keep the peace." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Sarah frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She exchanged a glance with her parents before rising to answer the door. As she opened it, she was met with a familiar face. Lisa, her best friend, who had stood by her through everything. Lisa grinned. "I come bearing gifts." She lifted a bottle of wine and a bag of Sarah's favorite snacks. "You didn't think I'd let you celebrate this new life without me, did you?" Sarah laughed, stepping aside to let her in. "Of course not. You're part of the reason I made it here." The evening was spent in celebration, filled with laughter, reminiscing, and toasts to new beginnings. As Sarah sat surrounded by the people who truly loved her, she realized she had gained something far more valuable than the life she had left behind: true happiness. For the first time in forever, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The core message of the story. At its heart, Sarah's journey is a testament to the power of reclaiming one's self-worth and refusing to let toxic relationships dictate the course of one's life. Too often, people stay in situations that diminish them, whether out of fear, obligation, or the belief that things might eventually change. But as Sarah's story shows, true change doesn't come from waiting for others to treat you better. It comes from making the difficult choice to walk away and build the life you deserve. Sarah had spent years sacrificing her happiness, pouring herself into a marriage that took and took without ever giving back. She tolerated Mark's neglect, endured the humiliation from his family, and carried the crushing weight of their financial struggles alone. But the moment she realized her worth, that she was more than just a provider, more than just someone's wife, everything changed. She took control, not just by leaving but by ensuring that her new life would be one of security, peace, and fulfillment. Her story is a powerful reminder that boundaries are not selfish, they are necessary. That financial independence isn't just about money, but about freedom. And that love, real love, should never come at the cost of self-respect. For anyone who has ever felt trapped in an unfair, one-sided relationship, Sarah's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. You are stronger than you think. You deserve happiness. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away.